Hello, I'm OlenaLake from Albany, New York, born and raised in Ukraine, and welcome to my channel, Ukraine War Q&A, and we continue discussing our questions of interest, and today we will be discussing negotiations versus escalations. There are many talks like no to escalations of conflict, ceasefire with following negotiations, and potential referendum on so-called disputed territories to identify the will of people. Many of those talks, as it appears in future revelations, are rooting in unbelief of Ukraine's possibility to win. Not standing for Ukraine to win means not standing for democracy to prevail and exist. So it means to play in accord with autocracies, with Russian Federation. I will call it shortly RF. This is exactly what Putin now wants. And this is that is why those talks are originated, developed, supported, and fueled by multiple Putin's emissaries or monitor or other benefits, influences, or just by simple Putin's enthusiasts and sympathizers. So there are multiple peace plans developed under that influence by different sides of from presidents to local Putin supporters. Just naming some latest which came around from African leaders, Rome Pope, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orbán, and so on. Via analysts and media, former authorities like Mr. Kissinger, God bless his clear mind and energy in his 100 years of age, up to a local district area Kremlin propagandist, Scott Ritter, Joe Lombardo, Dan Kovalic, and Medea Benjamin, who, even though condemning the war, speak exact Kremlin rhetoric, using its propaganda tools, which will be discussed further in our sessions. So, what in practice this means? Let's start with ceasefire. The shooting stop and tank stop. And where the Russian RF tank stops, that land will be under RF's control, not Ukrainian territory. Then negotiations follow. Ukraine has already had two versions of those negotiations, Minsk I and Minsk II in 2015. None of those brought the peace, the stable peace. This was the time for Putin to regroup and reinforce his army to the new round of bloody and a full-scale war, which is going now. Suggesting the same scenario again and again is a definition of insane, doing the same thing with anticipation of different result. So Ukraine is not going into that insanity. So let's talk about negotiations. Those are negotiations pose two subject questions. First, with whom? Second, about what? First, with whom? With international terrorist Putin, with kidnapper of children, who was giving the order of arrest for this, who stops the grain deal, which potentially will cause the hunger in African countries, who from one hand terrorizing the world via his puppets, continuously threatening by nuclear bombing of London, Washington, Poland, etc., and creates the genocide and ecocide in Ukraine. Just recall the recent Kakhovka dump. On the other hand, who doesn't have a control over his own country, who creates created different Kremlin towers fighting with each other up to Prigozhin's rebels' march up to Moscow, which Putin left, flying away without radar identification, like Marco Baron, in order to not to be discovered, who turned his country into Absurdistan by expression of Gherkin on Sturkov. There where constant lie is coming and streaming from every media, which he created to feed the nation and himself, who never keeps his word, who breaks any and every agreement, naming just Budapest one of 1994, and who confusing the world by his presence in multiple places in the same time with different personality features. So even skeptic already assured that it is not clear who of those is real and responsible for state negotiations. Second, negotiations about what? There is no common dot exists between Ukraine and RF to negotiate. RF started this war to grab the territory and kill Ukrainians for being Ukrainians, when Ukraine is fighting to exist. As Golda Meir, the fourth prime minister of Israel in early 70s, once said, how you can negotiate with a person who came to kill you. Then some other aspects. Negotiations can go forever, as China's representative admitted when he was visiting Ukraine and RF with China position on conflict. For example, North and South Korea do not have any peace agreement. They are on ceasefire forever. The life conditions of North Korean dictatorship caused northern and southern Koreans to be different. Due to nutrition differences, for example, average North Korean adult is 5 inches shorter and up to 27 pounds lighter than their Korean counterparts. Ukraine have already had that experience of 8 years negotiations after Minsk II agreement in 2015, with imprisoning and torturing Ukrainians in Donbass, and which went to nowhere, just to another war. This is not for Ukraine, as we spoke. Referendum. First, who will conduct it and for whom? In the beginning of Minsk negotiations, Ukraine suggested such referendum with participation of all Ukrainians, and not only from Donbass area. Negotiators rejected that. As a result, will be unity of Ukraine, obviously. Now they offered to hold the negotiations in Donbass when 2 million of Ukrainians left Donbass upon its occupation. Their opinion will not be counted. Donbass was repopulated by Russians from Russian federations. Their opinion will be predetermined for Russian Federation. RF's propaganda brutally brainwashed the population of Donbass, so many of them were affected. The activists and supporters of occupation would be anticipating their punishment from Ukraine government. Obviously, their opinion will be predetermined for RF. Yes, there will not be easy way to reintegrate those Donbass people back to Ukraine after its victory, with some amnesty and so on. But the relatives of those on free land of Ukraine and other Ukrainians are looking forward to going that path. Second, who would be those holding a referendum? Russian Federation, USA, United Union, United Nations, or European Union. Isn't that for Ukraine's? Isn't that the Ukraine's business, which those peacemakers suggesting being held by others? Like Miss Medea Benjamin said, we will hold the referendums. Isn't that a sign of imperialism, which she is so actively fighting against? Why anybody else besides Ukraine will decide the destiny of Ukrainians or part of its territory? Ukraine is not a little brainless girl. Ukraine showed its dedication to the free world values and completely adults' decision on the war and no other life subject. So take your hands off Ukraine, Putin's peacemakers, please. So let's talk about escalation. It is not clear what they mean by escalation and for whom is that. Ukrainians have full-scale war on its territory, with deaths of soldiers and civilians, genocides and tortures of Ukrainians, ecological disaster from dam explosion by RF, and so on. What more for Ukrainians can be? They have all the bouquet of those escalations. Escalation to nuclear weapons. Ukrainians already had the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe, so they know what it is. They recently survived the dam explosion, the ecocide, which can be equated to nuclear one. Is that what scares Americans? So they want to negotiate out of Ukraine its territory and people to stop being afraid of nuclear bombing. So for this, they are ready to let RF kill Ukrainians on occupied territories, ceasefire from Ukraine by RF. Isn't it not only attestation of imperialism, but more inhumanity? Maybe those negotiators would like to offer to RF the territories of their own countries and their people to be tortured to satisfy Putin's land hunger for some time until his next request. For example, Alaska in the US, on which Putin also has put his eyes on. Or better find another way. Just let Ukraine win, defeating that terrorist state, RF, and get the stable peace forever. Thank you.